So at this part of the class, we are going to start doing more projects. And so when we do projects, you really need to think about design when we're doing a lot of these projects. Every single project that we do is going to need some sort of design work in it. And so when it comes to being a graphic artist, if you ever become a graphic artist, a lot of design has to deal with what's called the project brief. Project brief actually addresses the design in detail and includes every aspect of the problem. So it also gives the roles of the client, designer, and viewer. So from now on, all these projects we're going to treat like actual graphic art projects. These are going to be things that are published. They're going to be on display. People are going to see them. And so we do have an audience for it. So it's important to understand how that plays a part in our design process. So the project brief is basically divided into three specific parts: the design problem, the client-designer relationship, and the viewer. So the first part is the design problem. So whenever we start a new project, you need to start thinking about what type of project is it actually needed. So what am I as a teacher asking you to do? Then really think about what is the function and purpose and what are the objectives and goals. And I usually talk to you guys about those pretty thoroughly. So I'm kind of like your client, and so you're trying to make these things for me to be published in different areas. So you really need to think about everything that needs to be created within that design problem. So what's the primary message? What considerations must be made to meet the needs of the client, the viewer? Are there any limitations or restrictions, especially when it comes to images? Now, when you get into the real world, if you ever do graphic art work, there are going to be limitations and restrictions. One of them might be a budget. So you have to know what you can do with the amount of money they're willing to spend. And then what is a schedule? When do you need deadlines done? And so on and so forth. Part two is the client-designer relationship. So this is a little bit more important when you're actually working for legitimate clients. Right now, you're just kind of working for me. But what are the responsibilities of the client? Does the client need to provide you with photos? Does the client need to provide you with information? Or do you have to gather your own information? What are the responsibilities of the designer? Is the client asking you to do a lot of the research? So these are important questions to know when you start doing work for other people, because if you're not provided photos, do you have to take your own photos? Because if you're doing these for pay, you do have to use original work. And then what is the level of the client involvement? So how often does the client want to see your work? Do they want to see updates? Do they want to see progress? So these are all questions that you'll need to know when you are working with a legitimate client. Main things that you need to know about the client-design relationship is you need to have respect and open communication. You also need to make sure that you have a shared vision. A lot of times thumbnail sketches are very important to have to kind of show what you see or what you think you see or what you think you got from the client to make sure that your ideas are aligning. You do need to have creative interaction and collaboration as well. Part three is the viewer. So the last thing that you really need to take into consideration is who is going to really be looking at this. So who is this project directed to? And what are the characteristics of the viewer? What makes the viewer unique? So when we do certain projects, whether it's logo work when we get to Illustrator or advertising work, which we're going to be doing here, who is it for? I mean, a logo for a small town cafe is going to look very different than a logo for a trendy cafe found on the beach. So you need to see who your client is for, or who the client is, and who the viewer is, and what the viewer wants to see. What's going to entice the viewer to look at the image or look at the project more and be more interested in it. And then you also need to think about how will the viewer interact with the design and what are the needs of the end user. So when you begin the design, there are three main things you need to do to get started, to get your project started. First, you need to brainstorm. You need to get ideas and write them down. It's easy to lose ideas. So there is going to be parts where I say you need to brainstorm ideas. Write a bunch of ideas down, and you can start eliminating ones that aren't going to work out. Then you need to conceptualize it. Start thinking, imagine a plan, create a visual scheme. So start thinking about what are some ideas that I could have? This may not be a final thing, but what are some pictures that could work with this? Or what are some colors that could work with this? So you're kind of creating that visual scheme. And then experimentation and development. This is where you are actually working with thumbnail sketches. You also need to experiment with fonts and images because you'll find out that fonts and images are extremely important. So do a bunch of different studies on exploring color, composition, typography, and sometimes step away from the computer, try something different or new, and introduce new things. Try different graphic shapes and different graphic elements to see what you can do. And have other people look at your work for tips and ideas. It's always good to get feedback as you go because they may see something from a different perspective. Then we're going to actually create the design. So we started beginning the design, coming up with our ideas. Now we're going to create them. And creating the design is basically the interaction of visual elements. If you've taken art before, you may have heard of the elements of art. So there are visual elements also in graphic design work as well. So you have to figure out how you're going to use color, form, image, and space and typography to create and to convey an intended message. And so you also need to really think about ordering system or hierarchy because the hierarchy defines the level of activity and importance for every visual element. So you need to figure out what's most important with your design and how are you going to convey that? What are you going to do to that part of it to make it known it's the most important part? So a strong systematic hierarchy provides accessibility, continuity, integration, navigation, and variety with that whole design. So how do you develop hierarchy? First, you need to rank the visual elements of your design. Is the text, is what you need to say the most important? Is there an image that's most important? So that's how you figure it out. What is the most important aspect of your design? You make the most important aspect your focal point. The second most important, the second main focus, and so on. And so then how do you make it a focal point? You vary that composition with the elements such as the size, the color, the contrasts, etc. So we're going to talk about those. So these are the compositional factors or visual elements. Contrast. If you have a high area of visual contrast, it helps achieve that hierarchy because it draws attention to that area. In this image, you can see the only place where there's even slight color is right here where the little boy is holding that. So your eye is drawn there first. It's drawn there first and then it starts following these lines and it draws your eye across the page. The next one is space. Space is extremely important. The background is just as important as the foreground. Space helps give you an effective ordering system by leading your eye through the design. Too much space is stale and static design, and too little space is a sensational overload. So you can kind of see with this design, yeah, they used space really well, but balanced out all this active area here with a lot of solid colors, solid spaces too, because that balances it out. If everything was colored here, it would just be too much going on. But this black and white is a good balance to all these bright colors. And you notice not everything is colored. There are some white areas in here too that helps also balance it out, breaks up the space a little bit more. Next thing is scale. Obviously, the larger something is, the more someone's going to look at it. So scale really helps with hierarchy. Obviously, the larger the images, the more important it is. So you can see right here, like this design right here, this design is about a graphic artist, the life of a graphic artist. 70% of being a graphic artist is dealing with people, and then so on and so forth. So you can kind of, it's kind of a fun little graphic about graphic artists. Now, quantity. You want to make sure that you do not overload your design. Many times less can be more, and it all depends on the mood that you're trying to convey with your design. This, obviously, is too much going on. First of all, you can't read the text, and that's a big issue. You want to make sure that your text is always readable. And then the colors just aren't great together. Like, I look at it, all I see is that face, and then I just don't want to look at anything else because it's just like overwhelming. I just can't even do it. Whereas this over here, this design here, it's very elegant, and it has all this extra white space to give that elegant feel along with the fonts and the text there. Orientation and position. By changing the orientation, so making sure not everything is up and down, having things go diagonally, go in different direction, these are ways to demand attention. So your eye can be drawn around the page. So obviously this butterfly is the most important because it's the largest, but your eye is drawn to the other parts too because they're not all the exact same way. This adds variety and contrast and makes it a lot more interesting design to look at rather than having both the butterflies facing the same direction. Depth, dimensions, and perspective. So overlapping images helps give your design depth if that's what you're trying to achieve. So you can kind of do some things with perspective and dimension if you want to add that, if you want to draw that. So if you want these words to lead toward the logo or the brand, Planer Magic, that's a great way to do that. Use that perspective and the overlapping to kind of create that depth and dimension. Typography. How you set text in a design can basically make or break a design. Text is extremely important in design. Text also needs to be divided hierarchically. What is the most important message you want to convey to the audience? How do you make it hierarchical? First, change the size. You can use the same font, but change the typeface, maybe bold, italicized, whatever. You can use a broad typeface family. So a typeface family means it's a typeface that has various options within it. So let's say Arial. Arial has Arial, Arial Black, Arial Bold Condense, Arial Narrow, Arial Italicized. So you have all these different options within that text. So you can use the same font family for consistency, but you can vary that font and draw your eye to different sections based on what part of that family you use. Now you don't want to use too many different fonts because it can lead to disorder. So obviously this is a great graphic to kind of show you, yeah, obviously you're going to read that first, and then you'll read this, then this one. And so you just naturally do that when you look at this design. Color. Color is important. So color adds visual interest and can set the mood of a design. It also heightens meaning. And color contrast can also demand attention, which it does help with that hierarchical development. So when you use color, you have to think, what kind of mood are you creating? Do you want a deep, dark, depressed mood, or do you want something happy? What colors convey those? Obviously, if you're having a darker meaning, you're going to use darker colors. If it's happier, you're going to use brighter, lighter colors. So those colors are very important in your design.
Cross country may be dismissed.
Then graphic shapes and linear elements. So these help to create some dynamic visual field. So you can put some just graphic shapes to kind of fill up space and help move the eye around the page. It also can support that primary content. So you might have actual literal photos in here, but the graphic shapes can help direct the eye and also add some more interesting design to it. When you are finished with a design, you do need to always go through a design analysis. And so these are some questions that you should ask yourself to help analyze your design. Is the design engaging and informative? Is the delivery of the message appropriate and clear? Does the design reflect its function and purpose? Are the visual elements cohesive? And is there a logical progression through the design? You will need to evaluate yourself on those, and also use these questions to evaluate others. It's very important that logical progression, yes. We don't want to have main points or focal points all over the page. You should have one focal point. That's the most important. Then it should be very obvious what's the next most important, and your eyes drawn around that page that way. And is it a reflection of its function and purpose? So you need to go back to, why was I creating this design in the first place? And does it end up being a reflection of that purpose? And then finishing touches. This is where you need to get picky, because I am really picky with this kind of stuff. Images, because your design is sold, you have to pay attention to copyright laws. That all just depends on whatever design it is, but most times you have to pay attention to copyright laws. So this is where, when we start doing our project work, you have to pay attention to them unless they say something different. So you might actually have to get out there and take your own pictures if you want to incorporate them. You can also cannot use already created logos, etc. So you kind of need to come up with your own ideas. Images. Careful about the resolution. We cannot have anything that will look fuzzy or pixelated. So you need to make sure when you create your documents to what the size specifications that are there, you have to make sure the resolution is 300. Cutting out images. We took time to learn how to cut out images well so that it looks good. If you take shortcuts on this, it's going to be noticeable and it's not going to look good. Then if you think it looks great on the screen, print it out and check it. Have a peer check it. And if you're that peer, be picky. Be picky. Really look at the different things and kind of nitpick at stuff, because it's very important to be very picky with this work. And then at the end, always never forget that often less is more. So it's okay to scale back. Okay? So sometimes you might have too much stuff going on. Make sure you never have too much stuff going on.